When we first heard about a Harvard psychiatrist who claimed autistic children could read minds, well, to be frank, we thought it was bullshit.
I'm really trying to dial in the mechanism here. I suspect that they're in synchrony, that we'll see a brainwave synchronization between the two.
What the is going on? But after reading Dr. Powell's book, The ESP Enigma, and hearing her featured in the hit podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, we couldn't ignore the evidence anymore.
And then when they ask the child, what's going on here? The child says, oh, I'm reading your mind.
Dr. Diane Powell isn't some internet quack. She's a Johns Hopkins trained neuroscientist who was teaching at Harvard when something happened that changed her entire career.
She said to me, your husband's a chemist. That got my attention because my husband was a biochemist. And then she said, and he's applying for a job in 2 different cities right now. And that really got my attention because that very week he was applying for a postdoc back at Johns Hopkins where we met and at UC San Diego.
That is spooky.
Yeah.
But here's the most disturbing part. It's not the claims of telepathic children that's irrational. It's the scientific establishment refusing to look at evidence that challenges their worldview.
It seems like people want to stand on the cliff edge and close their eyes and pretend like the opposite side of the cliff edge isn't even there.
Meanwhile, there's a bunch of autistic children on the other side of the cliff going, hey, we actually are here. And if you think this conversation can't get any weirder, just wait until you hear what these children are actually saying.
I think that we really need to discover that feeling of love within ourselves for others and for the planet. That's one of the key messages that these autistic individuals have.
Welcome to Sickboy. Holy smokes, I'm so excited. Dr. Powell, I just want to start this whole thing off first by saying, as a trained neuroscientist and psychiatrist, who's also been exploring the scientific case for psychic phenomena, let's say right now, the 3 of us, we said to you, all right, here is unlimited funding. We can guarantee you absolutely 0 scientific gatekeeping. What is the experiment or study that you would launch tomorrow?
Wow. Well, I can tell you the studies that I am doing. I mean, that I'm going to be looking at these telepathic pairs and doing QEEGs to see basically what's going on. I'm really trying to dial in the mechanism here. And I suspect that they're in synchrony, that we'll see a brainwave synchronization between the two. So that's one set of experiments that I want to do. I'm also very interested in seeing if we can understand the nature of these downloads that these children get, and see if we can understand better the phenomena behind that. So some of the experiments I want to do are actually go beyond just the kind of observational work that I do with these children and go into really the understanding of reality itself. So I have a number of people that I have conversations with who are physicists, and we're really trying to understand the underlying mechanisms at that level of reality.
Sounds easy. I mean, yeah.
Diane, for the uninitiated, what is a telepathic pair?
Hey folks, if you wouldn't mind doing me a huge favor and just take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and of course hit the thumbs up button as well. And hey, look, if you don't have time to watch the video right now, I ask that you just take a second to add it to your watch later playlist. It would mean the world to us. And thanks for being here. All right, without further ado, let's get back to the episode.
So what I'm calling the telepathic pair is basically one of these autistic children and whoever it is that they are able to read the mind of. And so sometimes it's a parent, sometimes it's the speech therapist working with them, sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's several individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll throw this out there for anyone who's just who's like maybe just getting caught up or has no idea what we're talking about here. Already, you're probably going, what the is going on? Like, what did I tune into? Well, buckle up, because you're going to be doing that the entire time if you haven't, say, listened to the Telepathy Tapes, or if you haven't, watched a recent episode that we did on Savant syndrome. And that's all those are all things that sort of led us to where we are here today with you, Dr. Powell. You've written a book called the ESP Enigma, the scientific case for psychic phenomena. You've been studying this for decades. Maybe set us up with a sort of primer for anyone who is completely new to this earth-shatteringly paradigm-shifting red pill moment that maybe some people might be having. In your words, what is Savant syndrome, and how does that play into the work that you eventually sort of dedicated your life to?
Well, the name savant comes from the Latin savoir, which means to know. And it's basically these individuals who know things and we don't understand how they know them. They may know how to solve complex mathematical problems, but they can't even do simple arithmetic. So going back hundreds of years, there have been individuals who never even been to school, and yet they can do complex mathematics. Mm-hmm. Similarly, there are people who've never studied music who can sit down and play very complex compositions, or individuals who have never studied art and who are just amazing artists. And so Savant syndrome is this mystery that has been accepted by science because it's reliably reproduced. And some of the savants I find the most interesting are ones like the one that Oliver Sacks studied, and he talks about in the book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And there were these autistic twins who were institutionalized, and they had this game they played where they would toss prime numbers back and forth to one another that were in multiple digits. And they were able to do this to 20 digits, which exceeded the computational limitation at the time in the 60s, which could only do 12 digits. And they said that the information wasn't something they were deriving. They just perceived it as a pure perception. And after I encountered my first interaction with somebody who was able to tell me information about myself and my future that there was just no way that she could know, I was shocked, but at the same time, I knew about Savant syndrome, and I thought, well, this is very similar. That you have somebody who somehow knows things that really defy our basic understanding of what information is and how it's accessed. And as somebody interested in the brain and consciousness, I decided that that's really the most important thing for me to study.
What was that moment? Do you remember? Do you recall, like, was it a specific patient you were working with, or like, what was the moment where you went, what the heck is going on here?
It was when I was on faculty at Harvard, and I was at Cambridge Hospital, and the position I had was one in which I would go to the medical, surgical, and obstetrical floors as a consultant if people thought that someone had a psychiatric condition in addition to whatever medical condition they were admitted for. And there was this woman who was half Native American, half African American, and she had been admitted the night before for all of the sort of signs of a heart attack and the symptoms of a heart attack. But back then, we didn't have the ability to determine whether or not somebody had had a heart attack as quickly as we can now. It would take a day or two for the blood work to come back. And she was wanting to leave the hospital before the blood work came back, and had told the staff that she was seeing ghosts and that she was psychic and she knew the blood work would come back normal and that she just wanted to go home. And because saying that you are psychic and see ghosts is considered a sign of mental illness, she was thought to be mentally ill, and they couldn't let her go without having a psychiatrist evaluate her. And basically, what they were expecting was for me to fill out the paperwork to commit her to the hospital so that she couldn't leave until she was medically cleared. And when I went in to see her, the first thing she said was that she was seeing ghosts and that they were really spooking her out. And I sort of humored her and saying, yeah, I guess there would be a lot of ghosts in a hospital. And and then she said, I'm also psychic, and I was born this way, and I was born with a caul over my face, and that has given me this sort of, third sight or whatever you want to call it. And I'm seeing all these things about you. Do you mind if I tell you what I see? And I thought, well, okay, I'll build a rapport and humor her. And so she said to me, your husband's a chemist. And that got my attention because my husband was a biochemist. And then she said, and he's applying for a job in 2 different cities right now. And that really got my attention because that very week he was applying for a postdoctorate in biochemistry back at Johns Hopkins where we met, and at UC San Diego. And then I said, well, where are we going to end up? And she said, well, in his heart of hearts, he wants to go to one city, but you'll end up in the other city. And I knew he wanted to go back to Johns Hopkins because that's where he was born. He's like 12th or 13th generation from Baltimore, family there. And he was really very much a dyed-in-the-wool East Coaster. So I thought, well, that is where he wants to go. And she said, you'll end up in the other one. And I said, oh, well, where is the other city? Without wanting to, give her too many hints. And she said, well, just name a bunch of cities. So I named, 10 or so cities. And then she said, oh, San Diego, that's where you end up. And while you're there, you'll give birth to a daughter. And that's the only child you have. And all of that came true.
Holy fuck!
Wow, that is spooky. That is spooky.
Bananas.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of this. But
Wait, I have to ask: Did you tell the doctors she was totally loopy and admit her for, or did you hire her on the spot and take her home to be your own personal psychic?
I know. I really. One of the regrets I have is that I didn't have any way of contacting her afterwards. And. So, what I did was, I was, as you can imagine, I was like, wow, okay.
Floored. Yeah, totally.
And, but what happened was she said, I really like you. She said, I'll stay if you are willing to come and see me again tomorrow. Yeah. And I said, okay, let's do that. And I told the staff that she was willing to stay and that I didn't feel that I needed to commit her. And she stayed. Her blood work came back normal and she left the next day.
The funniest part about all that is that the entire medical staff after that, regardless of what you said to them, looked at you and went, God, Diane, she's magic.
Totally.
She's unbelievable.
And the whole psychic thing notwithstanding, it was like, even if all of that was just even if it was just a bunch of lucky guesses, it's like what she really needed was somebody to just be there with her and listen to her. Yeah. And then it was like, hey, and now you're up for staying until we understand what was going on with your blood work.
Yeah.
And patients and doctors need to hear that.
I mean, I wanted to ask because I feel like, and by nature, I'm a fairly skeptical person, but I'm also open-minded, I would say. And I imagine if I was in your position, there would be parts of that where I would be like, wow, this is incredible. Like I'm experiencing this. This feels very real. And also I like everything I've been taught tells me that this isn't possible though. And so, there would be this conflicting pull of
this moment of very
what's
deep
happening?
conflict.
And also so I'm curious, how did you feel in that moment? What was that experience like?
Well, yeah, it didn't really create the kind of cognitive dissonance for me that it does for a lot of individuals. I guess I have a unique kind of mind that way, because I'm attracted to things that don't make sense, because I see that as how you advance science. And so the other piece to know is that besides being aware already of Savant syndrome, I mean, I went to, I met Oliver Sacks in 1986, shortly after he wrote that book. So I've been aware of it for a long time, and met this patient at Harvard in 1989. So, and you have to also understand that neuroscience is a relatively new field. When I was going to undergraduate at Ohio State, neuroscience wasn't even a major. And I knew that it was what I wanted to study, and so I carved out my own major, just taking courses in physiological psychology and biology and biophysics, and just kind of and working in neuroscience laboratories, doing recording from crayfish axons with microelectrodes, and I was just working with electron microscopes. So I was doing this before it was even a field, and I knew that the science's model for how the brain functions was just really, really incomplete. I mean, there's this basic assumption within neuroscience that the brain creates consciousness, and yet we still don't have any explanation for how that would even be possible for it to be an emergent property of the brain.
I am curious though, like when you went home from, I'm not sure if you can remember exactly how this went, but when you went home from the hospital that day and I'm sure told your husband about the experience, do you remember what that interaction was like?
Oh, he didn't know what to think, and he just said, "Boy, we should invite the women over for tea." He was just like,
and like buy a lottery. What's coming up? What's coming up in the Supermax this next week?
I am like I mean, so firstly, I appreciate that you as someone who's studying the human brain and neuroscience and consciousness and like all the things that we just don't even realize about consciousness and the nature of like our reality. It makes sense to me that you took that moment and it was like, oh, okay, all right, this is interesting. I'm going to follow this thread, and instead of going, I'm going to bury that because that doesn't compute with like the dogmatic sort of views that I've been entrenched in my entire career. But even as someone who's listened to the telepathy tapes and myself, out of the three of us, I'm like, I would say I'm the, for sure on way far over on the spectrum of like very open to a lot of things that most people would roll their eyes at.
He's wearing a shirt that on the back says, "I want to believe."
It's not even, it's beyond that. I do believe. But even then there have been moments in following the work that you've been doing, listening to telepathy tapes, or even like things that are sort of tangential to this, like the work that's coming out of like Skywatchers with Jake Barber, who I know you're like familiar with their work. There are moments where I'm going, okay, even for me, this is pushing my bound, this is pushing my limits, like and this is wild. Have you had any of those moments, even though you seem to be so open-minded and willing to follow those threads? Have there been moments where you've come across, whether it's a client or a particular thing that you've witnessed or been a part of, where you went, okay, I actually need to like this is now I need to take a step back to like gather myself because this is so mind-boggling.
Well, see, I think for me, one of the things is that this has unfolded for me. My understanding of these phenomena has unfolded for me over the course of, close to 40 years. And so when you have something unfold for you in a slower process, it doesn't have quite the same effect on you that something like the telepathy tapes, where it's just like boom, 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 one phenomena after another. But of course, that's going to create wait a minute, this is totally different from anything that I was taught in school. And so it's really been an evolution over this period of time. And another thing that, I mean, if people read my book, they'll see that I have been interested in physics for a long time. And I have a brother who's a theoretical physicist, and we've been having conversations about consciousness for decades. And when you enter into modern physics, whether it's the theory of relativity that tells us that time is an illusion, or into quantum mechanics, which talks about non-locality and entanglement, that you start to realize that our sense of reality is very different at the fundamental level from the reality that we interface with in this what's called sort of the macro world.
It reminds me of it. It reminds me of the way that we very much know and are accustomed to and comfortable with the spectrum of light, and knowing that we have a spectrum of light that we can see, and we're cool with that. And we also are very understanding and comfortable with the idea that there's lots of light that we can't see. But we also know that that light is having an effect, and it's doing something, and it's got consequences, and it interacts. But yet we can't see it, and it's, you need special equipment, and we've built special equipment for that. Diane, like something that I'm curious of, and I think especially in the way that you described this, like the telepathy tapes, you listen to it, and it's like, it's being like, it's like a nuclear bombardment of all this information that for a lot of people is very fresh, very new, mind-boggling.
Drinking water out of a fire hydrant.
Yeah. And for you, it's not like that. You've been doing this for decades. It's a slow drip. You're uncovering, piece by piece, probably very minuscule piece by minuscule piece over time. And in listening to the show and having conversations with these guys and other people in my life around, what the show kind of tries to explore, I've been thinking about this, I guess we'll refer to it as a phenomenon. I suppose that's the right word to use, of telepathy, ESP, this maybe new way of understanding consciousness as this idea that like scientific discoveries over time have been, you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you're looking across this gorge to another cliff edge that you can see across the way, and you can see that it's there because like you've observed that there's something over there. You can see it with your eyes. There's no bridge to get to the other side. You don't really have the tools to build the bridge yet. You're not really sure where you're going to get the tools, but you can see over there and it's there. And so you go out and you forge the materials and you make the tools and you build the bridge, and then eventually you get over to the other side and you go, wow, we're here. We understand. And it seems like with this thing, after listening to the show and the way that it's out there, it seems like there's such a case for being like, it's there. We can see it. There's something there. Can we build the tools? Can we make the tools to build the bridge to get to the other side and understand this in a big way? You've been doing this your whole life. Like, what has that journey been like? And what are the obstacles that you've faced in trying to get people to get on board with building the tools?
Yeah, it seems like people don't even want to like look across, and they don't really want to build the bridge, even though we know.
It seems like people want to stand on the cliff edge and close their eyes and pretend like the the opposite side of the cliff edge isn't even there.
Meanwhile, there's a bunch of autistic children on the other side of the cliff going, hey, we actually are here.
Yeah. And they're yelling and they want help.
Plugging the ears going, no, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not.
It's actually not a cliff, it's a hill.
Yeah, that's right. Whoa, hey.
Spoiler alert.
I know that's a big question, but tell me how you feel about that journey and how it's gone.
Well, it's been a fascinating ride. Well, and that is, I mean, I really am by nature a bridge builder. And I have the background that really enables me to do that. And what I mean by that is that when I made the decision to go to medical school rather than graduate school, it was in large part because I knew that the training of a medical doctor, especially at a place like Johns Hopkins, the medical training is like going to graduate school in all of the different sciences that relate to understanding humans. So it was like a graduate education in psychology and neuroscience, but also in biochemistry, and in anatomy, physiology. I mean, just microbiology, immunology. I mean, it's just like all of these different fields. And as I said, I already had this interest in physics. And I see that what needs to happen is just kind of knitting all of these fields together. Yeah, and to some extent, I did that in my book, The ESP Enigma, and I'm continuing to do it. And I think it's very, very doable. I have a number of scientists who have reached out to me who are extremely forward-thinking people who appreciate my approach to this because they see that I'm really trying to marry these phenomena with mainstream science. I'm not trying to turn this into something that is just woo and just say, well, accept what I'm saying, just based on faith. I'm really trying to see if we can put a scientific explanation behind it.
To that point, I'm curious to hear your thoughts around so again, referring back to the telepathy tapes, there are multiple moments where if you've listened to the show, you're constantly like listening to these experiments that are happening. And, if you are taking that in and believing it to occur the way that you hear it, it's like, holy smokes, this is clearly, like me, some ding dong who has no background in science. I'm hearing this and going, oh my God, 100%. It's just telepathy. And there's nothing else anyone can say about it because it's just so bananas that this is happening. But you've said multiple times on the show and in interviews since about how, listen, like this does not stand up to the scientific rigor required to give any sort of nod to proof that this is telepathy, right? So what I'm curious to know from you, and I guess that sort of like plays back to that question that I had at the very top, is what does that look like? If you were to take the sort of the guerrilla style experiments that Kai and you were doing in a mother's living room with her son, what would it take in terms of like the scientific rigor and the structure set in place so that you could do an experiment like that where it would stand up to the I guess the scrutiny that you need in order for this to be viewed within the scientific community as a real tangible like piece of evidence that stands for that's on your side?
Well, I know what the skeptics would like to see. That they would like to see the child and whoever it is that they're reading the mind of in totally separate rooms without any way in which there could be any kind of cueing at all, whether it's auditory or visual. And what we have is we have children that are in like a separate room, let's say from the mother, but they're not entirely out of auditory range. And that's problematic.
Or is this more like subconscious cueing, versus like conscious cueing and
it's definitely not conscious cueing. There's absolutely no way this is conscious cueing. Okay. There's nothing about this that's a scam. What people have to realize is that ever since I first put the hypothesis out there that if anybody would be able to prove ESP is real, it would be an autistic savant. After putting that out there, I have had well over 60 different individuals around the world contact me because they were in a state of shock because of an interaction they had with a child they were close with who repeatedly was able to either type out on a keyboard or point to a letterboard what spelling out what it is that the person was actually thinking, or information that the person had that they had never shared with the child. And it spooks them, and then they contact me, and most of them do not want to be known by anybody. They want to remain strictly anonymous. These are people who are doctors, engineers, attorneys, various professionals who realized that their whole reputation would be at risk if they ever went public with this. And the accounts that I have from these mainly parents, but sometimes it's a teacher or a speech therapist, is that they just don't, it's rocked their worldview. They don't know what to make of it. They're contacting me because they don't know how to even raise a child under these circumstances. And, some of them are, fearful. They're like, gosh, every time I'm thinking something negative about my child, is the child aware of that? And, how, or how is it that this child can learn and get an education if they can cheat like this? I get all kinds of, questions like that. And the story is just over and over again the same kind of scenario where they have this autistic child who they've worked with to teach them how to communicate in one form or another. Because of this sensory motor issue they have, they are not able, they have an expressive aphasia, meaning that they can't express language, but they still have an intact ability to understand language. And so just like you had, Stephen Hawking, who lost his ability to express language because of his ALS, these children have some condition that's affected them, and yet they still can have, and oftentimes do have brilliant minds. And so they run into this, with their kid, where they think at first that their child is this mathematical genius, and they go, oh well, this kid's a mathematical savant. We have all kinds of reports of this in the literature. But then what happens is that they're doing math with the child, and they see that the child is actually getting the answer from them and not doing the math itself. And then when they ask the child, what's going on here? The child says, oh, I'm reading your mind. And then they're like, oh my gosh. And then they look up telepathy and autism, and then they find me and contact me.
So back to the point of the skeptics, because I've seen, obviously I've seen the skeptics that are saying, well, there's some sort of conscious cueing happening, which, like, again, you just stated. And if you really do listen to the telepathy tapes, it's like, or watch the videos, you're like, well, I don't see how that could ever be possible.
The show does a very good job of kind of tossing that out.
But what about the case for subconscious cueing? What is that? And like, what does that even mean, subconscious cueing? And if that is even possible, like that this could be what it is, what would that look like? Even though I'm guessing you also don't think it's that, which, I mean, I don't think it's that. So maybe I'm projecting that onto you. I'm just going to telepathically just beam it into your head now. You don't either.
No, I don't. No, I don't. I mean, this idea of subconscious cueing, I mean, a lot of that comes from this story of this man who had a horse that he was going around saying this horse can count. And the horse was named Clever Hans. And what it was discovered was that the person who owned this horse was having the horse, tap its, use its hoof, to tap how many, whatever it is, like how many apples do I have here or whatever. And what they discovered is that this person was not aware that he was doing it, but there was some change in his demeanor or his body language such that he was cueing the horse when to stop tapping. And so it's not really that the horse is counting, it just knows stop when you see this person do this. And of course, anybody who has done training with animals for like the circus or whatever knows that you can give them a very, very subtle signal, and they can use that to know what to do next. So that's where this whole idea of subconscious cueing comes from. And so the question is there some kind of inadvertent signal that the parent is giving the child when they're asking them to read their mind? And it's harder to think of how that could be happening when you have a child. First of all, I can understand why when they see a letterboard, particularly if the letterboard isn't stationary, why they might think, well, the way the letterboard is held or, positioned in some way is going to give a cue. Although, you're talking about, 26 different letters. So you'd have to have 26 different, cues for that. And these children do point to the letters very, very rapidly. But they're, we know that that savants have amazing pattern recognition skills. So, I mean, it's within that, realm. But you have these children who can do it, and they're typing independently into a keyboard or onto an iPad, and there isn't the letterboard as the interface, and so it's not how something's being held that's transmitting the information. So then you say, well, how else could this information be transmitted? And my biggest hypothesis is that I wouldn't really call it subconscious cueing as much as what I would say is, if it's not telepathy in the way that, so for example, people like Dean Radin, who's done research in telepathy and Faraday cages, define telepathy as, an entanglement of people's consciousness with someone else. If it's not that, the most likely thing that it is would be that they're literally hearing the thoughts. And one of the things that we know about these children is that they have super sensitive hearing. In fact, some of the children need to be wearing, they need to be wearing noise canceling headphones just so that they can concentrate, because they're so disturbed by just the but all kinds of noise. They sometimes they can hear somebody having a conversation down the block. And so then you're like, well, where is that, sound coming from? And it's not that, once again, it's not that the parent is there, whispering under their breath, trying to cheat the system. What I suspect it could be is that there has been research that shows that even when we read silently to ourselves, that our vocal cords vibrate.
Wow, that's fascinating. I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was like, wow, are we emitting frequencies? Like, are our thoughts emitting frequencies?
Back to your point there, Taylor, but like the light, the spectrum of light that we do not see, but we know is there. And I think this was even spoken to on the telepathy tapes. Was it Lucille Ball who had the filling in her teeth?
Yeah,
and she was hearing it in her head, going, "Oh my gosh,
I'm hearing voices.
I'm hearing voices in my head. I just heard the New York Knicks hit a home run, and
3-pointer, but different.
Hit a slap shot goal, and she's telling this on it was the Tonight Show or something.
Yeah.
And the music was getting louder and louder and louder, and I realized it was in my mouth. And it was beating in my ears. I could hear the tune and everything. I recognized the tune. So the next day I mentioned it to Buster Keaton. And he said, what street were you on, Moore Park? And I said, yes. He said, you went by the radio station. You picked it up. Well, you got any fillings? I said, yes. He said, you picked it up in your teeth. Well, I could hardly wait to go by there again.
But it turns out she had metal in her teeth, and the metal was picking up the radio frequency, and so she could, through bone conduction, was hearing the radio, the radio channel through her teeth.
Right.
If our thoughts are like some sort of
radio wave,
radio wave, that sort of lines up for me. The one thing I do want to say though, based on, and I know that this doesn't stand up to the rigor, because it's just an opinion, but the thing that kind of breaks my heart when I hear the sort of skeptic's side of it is that it rarely ever takes into account the person's experience and their word, right? So I know that this doesn't stand up to scientific rigor, but it's okay, if you're hearing a non-speaking autistic child speak through through their iPad, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm reading the thoughts of my mother, or I'm reading the thoughts of you, or I'm getting this information from somewhere else. It's just coming to me." And the sort of knee-jerk reaction is,
you can't do that.
No. Yeah, that's not an explanation. So we need to, we need to not take your word as something that's of value here, where we're like you must like we must. It's so, it just like, it makes me so, I don't know, it just makes me so sad that there's this population of people that are just that have already been ignored for so long and are continued to be ignored when it comes to these miraculous sort of statements that they're making about their reality. And just because their reality isn't a part of our assumed or shared reality, we just think that it's quackery or woo or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about it. It's that, I mean, when I trained as a doctor, I mean, we gave great credence to what parents said about their child. I mean, they're the one who knows their child the best. I mean, now we need to filter, we need to take that and realize it's filtered through whatever the lens they have. But still, their observations are very, very critical. And people's statements about what their inner experience is also critical. Now, then you look for, well, is there any objective evidence for what they are saying is their subjective experience? And when you find that, then you have to lend it some credence. And just because that is not how I experience things, because I have different, maybe I have a different range of frequency that I can hear, or different range of frequency that I can see, it doesn't mean that they're not capable of perceiving those things. It's just that, we really, when you look at both light and sound, which contain information. I mean, that's how we're able to have this conversation now, is that we're able to see each other and hear one another because of light and sound. And so, so it contains information. And when you look at the spectrum that most human beings can directly experience, it's a fraction of what's
quite
out
narrow.
there.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about that in the sense that, there's a lot of focus on neurodivergent or children with autism and this phenomenon. Taylor, Jeremy, and I are all yoga teachers. I did my yoga teacher training in India, and where I was at in Rishikesh, I felt like it was this like very like, it just felt spiritual, the place that I was staying in. And I was there for 6 weeks, and every night we did 30 minutes of, it wasn't even called meditation, but it was basically meditation where you were just expected to sit in silence. And at first it was very difficult to sit still, and I didn't really get the purpose of it. And over the course of the 6 weeks, I started to find myself feeling a little bit more comfortable, having more and more interesting experiences. And then probably around the middle of the 4th week, I found myself sitting, and there was this like pulsing light that I started to focus on, and it just like grew and grew, and it got brighter and brighter. And all of a sudden I was standing in this like basement. It felt like a basement, and there was this big window, there was a pool table and a body of water. And this girl who was also at my training was just standing there. And as soon as I realized like what I was seeing, I was like, whoa, what is this? And as soon as it kind of became conscious, it just disappeared. And so I asked her afterwards, I was like, hey, do you play pool? She was like, not really, but I have a pool table at my cottage. And I was like, is your cottage on a lake? She was like, yeah, why? That's kind of creepy. And I was like, I think I was just at your cottage. She was like, that's really weird. And it was so real to me. I went down and I asked my yoga teacher the next morning. I explained it to him, and he was like, Brian, consciousness is like the internet, and we all have our own web pages. And sometimes when you're able to quiet your mind enough, your consciousness enough, you're able to leave your own web page and see the rest of the internet. And
dude, you were surfing the Akashic records, brother.
It was so
Hell
crazy,
yeah.
because like that experience to me was so, I know it was real. It was real to me, but at the same time I was like, that was like, I must have fell asleep or have been dreaming. And when I started to hear about ESP and children with autism, I started to wonder, like, how does this play into like my idea of consciousness, and what consciousness might really be, and how other people can experience different levels of that. And I'm curious from your perspective, Diane, hearing that story, like, what comes up for you, and like, how do you think of consciousness after all of the work that you've done?
Well, I would agree with what you were told. I mean, I think of consciousness as being like the cloud, and that our brains are really our navigational tool for it. So I think just like whether it's a computer or a smartphone. I mean, we use these devices to access this information that is, it's wireless, right? We don't even need to have things wired in anymore. And yet we can access all of this information in real time.
Do you think I just want to ask, like, has it changed the way that, like, when you're lying in bed at night and you're thinking to yourself before you fall asleep, like, I wonder, like, can I experience that? Like, how can I have, are you curious about that for yourself, like experiencing these types of things?
Oh yeah, well, I've experienced some things. I mean that. I've experienced knowing things that I really don't know how I knew them without even trying.
Yeah.
And so I really do think that I think it's an ability that these autistic children have in spades, but it's something that all of us could develop if we really made it our intention and put the effort into it.
This might be a bit like speculative, but I am dying to know, like, your gut instinct. Do you think that this is like a new path of evolution within the human ability, or do you think that this is like tapping into something ancient that's existed for forever?
I think it's existed for as long as we can.
So
it predates history even.
Sure,
It's that ancient. I think that it really dates way back. And that what's happened is that it's like we've been in the dark ages where we have lost our awareness of what we really are truly capable of as humans. And as part of coming out of that dark ages, we now have this technology that creates a nice analogy for us so that we can even comprehend that which, 50 years ago was incomprehensible and totally science fiction to most people. Even these devices were science fiction when I was a kid.
And that's what you mean is like the way in which we wirelessly communicate with the world around us in so many different ways might be a bridge to more easily understand or accept the idea that we could wirelessly communicate without the device.
Right. Yeah, I think so. One of the things is that part of how you build bridges and part of how you, evolve, it comes from having to be able to imagine something, and first, and once you can imagine it, then it's easier to actually accomplish it, or and particularly if you believe it. And so like once the 4-minute mile was beaten by Sir Roger Bannister, then it's all of a sudden there are other people who are now beating it because they know it's possible. And so I think that what's happening is these kids are showing us what's possible, and it's going to help to evolve humanity. But it's not that we're acquiring a new ability that didn't ever exist before. It's that we're becoming reacquainted with it in a different way.
This kind of begs two questions that I was curious about asking you, Diane, and I thought about them separately, but I feel like they might make sense as a pair. Is
a telepathic pair?
The role, or maybe a telepathic pair. The role of both belief and skepticism in science. I know that they can both they both have their limits, and they are both could be interpreted in different ways to mean kind of different things. I know that you've been a little bit on the I don't know if you would describe it as such, but on the malicious end of treatment of the scientific world at times in your career, and I feel like the justification for that is skepticism. I feel like that's maybe how people would justify that treatment, is because they would say, well, I'm just a proud and diligent skeptic. So I'm curious about how you feel about belief and skepticism, and how they fit, and what their roles are in life, or in the scientific method in science.
Well, there's different types of skeptics. I mean, there are people that are skeptics just because they just can't grasp a concept, and it just makes them just go, it doesn't make sense to me. It's not how I experience reality. And as long as somebody is still open-minded and thinks, well, that could be possible, I just don't get it, then then that level of skepticism isn't something that's enough to shut down the phenomenon itself. But if somebody is, just die hard, that this is impossible, absolutely no way, then it appears that can actually influence the outcome of of an experiment. I mean, this is something that parapsychologists have known for a long time. That's called the goat sheep effect. Because you can have, if you get rid of the skeptic, the diehard skeptic, the experiment shows that these phenomena can occur, but then you bring that person in, and it's just like shuts it all down. It reminds me of that cartoon. I think it was Warner Brothers who did it, where there was this dancing frog that could sing all these show tunes, with a cane and a top hat and whatnot, and the man who found this frog was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to bring it to Hollywood and make a fortune. And then as soon as he brings the frog to
doesn't sing,
to the the people at the studios, the frog just says ribbit, and so and to understand this from a scientific standpoint, it really, you have to go back to what we understand about the nature of reality from quantum physics. And John Wheeler is among the physicists who said that there is this co-creation of reality. Consciousness plays a role in the creation of reality, and that comes from the work such as the double slit experiment that shows that whether or not something is a wave that has interference patterns, or is a particle that has a defined location, it depends upon whether it's observed or not. That the act of observing defines what we're observing.
That's like I watched something on the double slit experiment like a week and a half ago, and it just melted my brain.
I want to be mindful of your time, and firstly, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule to blow our minds out of the water and help set a little bit of a scaffolding for us to rest on while we catch our breath to climb a little bit further up towards the high tower of just absolute bananas, batshit crazy possibility that exists out there in the world, where you kind of swim every single day. But before we do wrap, just a bit of a silly, fun question for you. If you right now had the ability to telepathically beam out one particular sentence to every person on Earth, what would be the one thing that you'd blast out there?
Oh, I would, it may sound cliche, but that saying, love is the answer. I mean, I think that we really need to we need to discover that feeling of love within ourselves for others and for the planet. That we really need to have more of that that approach to life. That's what's being demanded right now, and I think that's one of the key messages that these autistic individuals have. In fact, there are people who are tattooing. Apparently, people are tattooing some of the messages that these autistic savants have provided us with on their arms, because they're so moved by them. And
awesome.
The key message is about love and how important it is.
I mean, yeah, and I like to think it would be really interesting to see what the reaction of the entire world would be if all of a sudden, all at the exact same time at 2:57 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, everyone just heard Diana's voice in their head say, "Love is the answer." What would happen to the world?
It'd be a better place. I also should say,
totally.
Or mass pandemonium.
Totally panic. Yeah, totally.
We've been huge fans of Diane's work, obviously, for a while now. We didn't go into like a ton of detail on the actual phenomenon themselves because, we're quite familiar with them. But definitely, if you're listening to this, pick up Diane's book. Yeah, the ESP Enigma. You can find links in the show notes of the episode, but you can also go to drdianehennacy.com. That's HENNACY.com, where you can find a copy of the book. And we have 2 copies here at the studio. Super happy to have them. Diane, I mean, thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We're such fans, and we cannot wait to just keep up with what's in the future for the work that you're doing, and the way that this literally could potentially fundamentally change every single person's life. I mean, this is, on my gut instinct, I feel like you are on a path, along with many others who are kind of supporting and doing similar work to you. You are on a path to getting us that one step closer to understanding a Nobel Prize. That's what you were going to say.
I mean, there's that's probably coming.
Like some sort of big prize.
But the meaning of like what this is, like the meaning of reality, the meaning of consciousness, the meaning of our existence. So I hope I'm alive to see it when that answer comes. And thank you for this.
Well, thank you very much.